Welcome to Pregame here on the Cyclone Fanatic Podcast Network. And of course, you could be watching on YouTube as well. My name is Chris Williams. No Leah Nelson this week as I am traveling. Leah had her day job and we just couldn't find time to catch up. So it's just me. I'll bring Aiden Wyatt in. He's going to host the show with me. But before I do so, I want to thank our great sponsors that bring all of this phenomenal free content your way on CycloneFanatic.com, Cyclone Fanatic Podcast Network, and everywhere on our Cyclone Fanatic social media platform, Cyclones2Ireland.com. Jeff and Grant had the executive director of the Aer Lingus College Football Classic on their Kicking It show this week. I would highly suggest you guys check that out. Really good, fun, informative conversation. Also, my doctors, my main men, Dr. Greenwald and Dr. Warmy at the McFarland Clinic. They are orthopedic surgeons. I go to Dr. Warmy for my shoulder all the time. It's phenomenal. You can't beat it. Doctors that work on the Cyclones, they can also work on you at the McFarland Clinic in Ames. My friends, Fairway Meat and Grocery and the Fairway Meat Market, and also Centurion Stone of Iowa. They also have a showroom in Omaha, Des Moines and Omaha. My guys, Judd, my guys, Joe, and Nate Millertime, who really runs the entire place over there in Ankeny, doing a great job. We are in the Wild Rose Casino Studios. I'll bring in Aiden Wyatt as he's going to quiz me on Iowa State and Kansas. The Cyclones enter this game as a 3-point favorite over the 2-6 Jayhawks, which is a very bizarre point spread for a top 20 team going up against a team that's only won 2 games. Aiden, were you even there? Do you even remember the house of horrors that Arrowhead Stadium has been for Iowa State over the years?
I remember the K-State games, but
yeah, you were probably a wee little man.
So that was that 08, 09? Or was it 09, 2010?
What are you, like 7?
So I was born in 01, so yeah, roughly.
Teeny tiny little Aiden at that point in his life. It's not been a good place for Iowa State over the years. Although I'm a believer that doesn't really matter. Like just because Seneca was in and that doesn't impact this team at all. I'm more worried about just Kansas. To me, seems they're better than their record would indicate. And what are you going to get from Iowa State after a loss? That's kind of where I set this thing up.
Yeah, so let's dive right into things. Obviously, a huge downgrade with me instead of Leah, but we're going to honor her.
Obviously.
First question, as always. What should we expect from the Kansas Jayhawks this weekend?
A very spirited team. Lance Leipold's done a really good job, I think. The way that they started, right, in the sense that they take a lot of transfers, that team could have quit. That team could have rolled over and died. In fact, it looked like they were going to. They really should have won that Kansas State game 2 weeks ago. If you watched it, they're coming off of a bye, so they're going to be fresh. And if I'm Kansas, if I'm Lance Leipold, you look at this, you say, hey, if we went out, we can go to a bowl game. They probably won't, but this is like the tale of 2 seasons type thing, and you can really get this thing sparked if you're them by beating a top 20 team like Iowa State. So one of the most talented quarterbacks in all of college football. His stats don't back it up this year, but if you've seen Jalen Daniels play, you know he's really good. Good running game, exotic blitz scheme on defense. I'm anticipating Kansas to play its best game of the year on Saturday against Iowa State.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Speaking a little bit about you think that they're a better team than what their record might indicate, the story of the week has kind of been, the parallels between this Kansas team and Iowa State of 2022. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, mainly because of the close losses, right? Like if you remember that,
it has nothing to do with the expectations, by the way.
Yeah,
vastly different expectations coming in for both teams.
Yeah, no doubt. That Iowa State team, if you guys remember back in that, like fans would be flabbergasted every week because the point spreads were always in the single digits, and it's like, oh, we're 2-6. How are we only a 3-point underdog? Well, it's because the power ratings love you. Power ratings love this Kansas team. There's only a 5-point difference between Iowa State and Kansas, and one's 7-1 and one's 2-6. So that tells me that there's a lot of respect there. And that was, well, why was that the case for Iowa State? It was because they had an elite defense, right? And Kansas, while I wouldn't say they have an elite offense or elite defense, they still, just because they play all these close games, because they've been right there, their power rating hasn't really tanked. And that's why all those games in 2022 with Iowa State were close. So Vegas couldn't really make you a 12-point underdog very often. That Iowa State team was pretty incompetent, I thought, on offense for the most part. They had Xavier Hutchinson, but it was really that was one of the best defenses that John Haycock and Matt Campbell have had that year, if you remember correctly. They just couldn't score. They couldn't run it together, and they couldn't play a complete football game. And it was kind of a season where it was thought of as a disappointment, and Matt Campbell made a bunch of changes after it. But you were also 4 plays away from winning 7 games that season. The Texas game comes to mind. The Kansas State game that year comes to mind. So that if I'm a Kansas fan, that's how I'm viewing this season. They were in control of a handful of these games in the fourth quarter and really let them go, where I'm guessing that Lance Leipold and his team probably thought that they should have won the games. They gave them away. That, to me, when I look back at 2022 with Iowa State, while I don't feel like they were this great, well-rounded football team, there are a lot of what-ifs, and that's how I feel this Kansas season's gone. So that Iowa State team couldn't figure it out. They just couldn't figure out how to win games towards the end. Will this Kansas team be like that? Well, we look back and they're 3-9, and you are who you are. At some point, it is what it is, and you're just not very good. Or is this a turning point for them where they can figure out how to win some of these close games? We'll see.
Let's flip it over to Iowa State. What do you expect from them coming off their first loss of the year?
I expect a very crisp offensive game. I think Iowa State's offense I think Iowa State's offense might play its best game of the season on Saturday against Kansas. So you have that. Why
do you think that?
Because I know they're way better. It's an execution thing. I didn't love the game plan against Texas Tech. I thought they were too conservative, specifically on first down. Bloom had the stat, 29 first downs. They ran the ball on 22 of them. That's unacceptable. Can't be doing that. It's got to be more balanced than that. But you also, when you go back and watch the game, you realize that there were a lot of plays that were there that they just simply didn't execute. Drop passes. Rocco's missed some balls that he doesn't normally miss. Picking up blockers, that sort of thing. So I think, I don't know if this team needed a wake-up call, I'm hesitant to even say that because it was what was Central Florida, right? They looked out of rhythm. I think you're back to the groove of playing in season without the bye. If they are going to have an elite week of practice all season, it's going to be this week right now, coming off the loss. They have too good of players to not bounce back. So I think they're very crisp and explosive on offense. I'm actually more worried about the defense because I think that this could be a little bit like Central Florida with Jalen Daniels, a running quarterback, really good running back as well. The defense is ranked number 1 in the Big 12, but that game 3 weeks ago against Central Florida was really, really bad. And Leipold's just too good of a coach to not take some pieces of that. And I think Iowa State's defense could struggle in this one.
You already touched on it a little bit before, but can Iowa State break the Arrowhead curse?
Yes, because I think they're overall a better team than Kansas. But they got to clean up the turnovers, man. I'd love to see them not give up a touchdown on the first drive of the game, right? I said this on a lot of shows, and there's no stat to prove it, but when you're losing to start every game, it's hard, mentally. Think about you as just a fan sitting out there. The players feel the same thing. So yes, they absolutely can. I'm really nervous about this game, though. I don't think I'm alone as far as Iowa State fans go. I don't know how you're not nervous going into this game, just the way it sets up. But same deal. I do think Iowa State's better. I think that they're a more disciplined team. That's another thing. It's you got to think that last week they had all those penalties, which was so unlike this team. You got to think that they cleaned that up. No stupid turnovers. Clean up the penalties. Iowa State should win. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Kansas, I'm not gaslighting you guys. If you've watched them play, and most of you did during Iowa State's bye week at Kansas State a couple weeks ago, they're not bad. They didn't look like a 2-6 team in that game. They have better players than that. But the question's going to be, how motivated are those guys at this point in the season at 2-6 if it's raining at Arrowhead Stadium? I don't know. I know Iowa State will be highly motivated. I think Iowa State's the better team all around. take Iowa State to win this one by 3.
Let's get into predictions.
Yeah, I got 20. I have 30 to 27. I would be really happy if this game is not down to the wire. It just feels like this is a close game to me. What about you?
Yeah, I think it'll be close down to the wire too. I got 34-28 Clones.
And Iowa State really, I don't know in the last 3-4 weeks, like why anybody would pick Iowa State to blow anybody out right now. Because especially when you watch this league, it's just these teams are so similar. I don't think Iowa State and Kansas are any different. I would be more comfortable going to Utah this week right now than I am playing Kansas in Arrowhead. I'm pretty confident I know what we're going to get from Iowa State. A good football team, an explosive offense, a good football team, a sketchy defense against the run. I don't know what to expect from Kansas. I'm just being completely honest with you guys because I could see it going either way. But I have a lot of respect for Leipold as a coach. I think most people who have listened to me over the years know that. I was pushing for him to get the job if Matt Campbell didn't take it. Okay, I really, really like this guy. And he's a really smart offensive coach. So I think that Iowa State's going to have its work cut out for him. But, man, 8-1 going into Utah next week, that sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah. Can I make a quick comparison while
Absolutely.
we're talking close games here with Iowa State? I know they have a couple 20-point wins already this year. But do you think it's kind of similar to, like, TJ Otzelberger's first and second year where it's like this team just isn't built to blow teams out? Like,
yeah, I mean, that's what happens when you have a hard time stopping the run too, right? Like,
yeah.
I think it could have been different if without all the injuries. Not making an excuse. It's just the reality, right? When you're playing with all those freshmen at the second level of your defense, I think the offense is certainly capable of blowing teams out. But you saw it like the West Virginia game, Aiden. You stopped the run really well and you blew them out. So, I mean, this isn't crazy. Like, what's the key? Okay, if you can stop Kansas's running game, you're probably going to win this game by 2 scores. I really believe that, but I think Kansas will put up 200 yards on the ground, though. I hope I'm wrong, but I think that they will, and that's why I think this is a game into the fourth quarter. I don't know if I call it
that Taylor Swift built of all places.
I think that those Iowa State basketball teams were trying to play ugly. I don't necessarily know if that's been the game plan.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think with basketball they were doing that on purpose. I don't think that give me Caleb Bacon and Carson Willich and Will McLaughlin, and I don't necessarily know if they're in that situation. But it is what it is.
Who could forget that Jackson State game?
Oh God. That's the only Iowa State basketball game in my lifetime that I've fallen asleep during. I didn't go because I had a newborn at the time, and I was rocking her, and Bloom was on the call of that game, and I fell asleep during it.
I was at that game. I remember. So that year, it was so funny.
Basketball game.
You know, they're obviously so bad the year before. So, like, the student section would be packed. Because they blew out someone in the first game, and then they played Oregon State, who ended up being horrible. So, like, there was a decent crowd for the Jackson State game, and it was the worst game ever.
Yeah. It was in the 40s, just truly, truly horrific. Yeah, I don't love the comparison because I know, like, motives here, but I could see why you would land on that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
When you can't stop the run, there's nothing more excruciating when your football team cannot stop the run. It's horrific. So, yeah. Hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully Iowa State locks them down, cruises to a win on Saturday. Thanks, Aiden. Appreciate you, man.
Yep. Thanks for
filling in. Thanks to our great sponsors, the Aer Lingus College Football Classic. Get your tickets now. Our doctors at the McFarland Clinics in Tyrionstone of Iowa and Fairway Meat and Grocery. I'm Chris Williams for Aiden Wyatt here in the Wild Rose Casino Studios. Join me at halftime and postgame for all of your game day analysis here on the Cyclone Fanatic Podcast Network.